Hello everybody, my name's Becky Metcalfe, and on behalf of Design Centre Chelsea Harbour, a very warm welcome to our Conversations in Craft, our series of talks that have been devised to run alongside Artefact. First of all, a bit of boring housekeeping. If I could ask you to turn your phones off because the session's being recorded, that would be wonderful. So, today's session is Handmade Interiors, aptly titled, I think, and we're absolutely thrilled that we've got some really wonderful speakers on our stage today. Leglood, Ptolemy Mann, and Juliana Cavaliero. Who better to speak to them than Grant Gibson, writer and podcaster? Let's give them a very warm welcome.
Hello, nice to see you. Thanks very much for coming. My name is Grant Gibson. And I have an esteemed panel of we have Joe, who's an interior designer, we have Ptolemy, who's an artist and maker, we have Juliana, who's a gallerist, and I guess this talk, probably more than any other that we've programmed this week, is about relationships. And I guess up to a point, I'm quite keen to talk about the perception of craft and how that might have changed in the design industry from three different perspectives. Format. Let's talk about the format, people. I'm going to get the panel just to very briefly introduce themselves, 3 or 4 minutes, possibly 5 if they're feeling loquacious. I will pick up some threads from there, have a bit of a chat for half an hour or so. I'm very keen to get you guys involved afterwards. So there'll be 5 minutes, 10 minutes if you're feeling saucy for questions. To that end, I'm quite keen to know who you are, if that's okay. And I know there are a couple of people here this morning. I kind of know what you do, but if you could still play my game, that would be really nice. So do we have makers and artists in the room? If I could have a show of hands. Quite a few. You look really bored doing it. Oh, God, yeah, I did this this morning, you know. Do we have designers? Interior designers or other types of designers? Couple. Media types. I'm looking at you because you've been using your phone and you're taking notes. And now you're laughing at me. Now that's fine. I'm used to that. Anybody I might have missed? Anybody get off the lift expecting to go to the showroom and find themselves in this talk and too embarrassed to leave? No one? Okay, well look, in that case we'll crack on. Why don't I get everybody to introduce themselves? I'll kick off with Joe.
Okay. Thank you.
That's all right.
I'm Jo Leglood. I'm co-founder of an interior design practice called Maddox Creative, which I co-founded with my business partner, Scott Maddox. We've been in business together for 10 years, working together for 15. But we've been friends for a really long time. Previously, I was an embroiderer in the fashion industry. So I started my life as a craft maker, my working life as a craft maker. And kind of always have a sort of sensibility to making, and I think that's what I bring uniquely to our business. My business partner's an architect, so we sort of have a textile side and an architecture side, but we've had this sort of shared aesthetic appreciation of many things, of history of architecture and fashion and catwalk shows and music. So we sort of meet sort of aesthetically and founded our business on that basis.
So I'm quite intrigued. I was going to go straight to Ptolemy, but I'm going to linger on you, Joe, if I may, which is this notion of being a maker and then going into interior design. When did that happen? Was there a moment when you thought, I'm fed up of being an embroiderer in the fashion industry, I'm going to do interiors? So when was that and why?
So I suppose struggling artist doing embroidery, sort of I freelanced for lots of different sort of fashion designers and sort of makers, and sort of going into their studios for a day and doing all of the hand assembly of different things, and beading dresses as quickly as I could that they were selling like hotcakes out of Liberties, that kind of level, in a little studio in Soho, and really loved it. But it's very hard to make a living doing that. And I sort of I've had enough of doing this for now, and I started actually working as an events organizer for a short time, and then I had my children.
Right.
And then sort of emerging from having my children, Scott, as an old friend, came round for dinner, and he'd been approached to do some interior design projects personally, so he had been working for some other designers, and needed some help. And when he started to talk about the materials he was working with, I kind of went, oh my God, okay, this feels like my next step. and he was needing help. So I started working with him, helping him on those projects, and then I was kind of realised the magnitude of what we were getting involved in, and thought I need to take control of some part of this. So now I run the business and kind of contribute in terms of aesthetics, obviously over all the projects, but then have this sort of try and make time for myself and my own art studio, where I've actually managed to carve out a little bit of time so I can paint and draw and stitch again. So yeah, I'm at that point now.
Interesting. Well, we will come back to that because you have a foot in both camps, which makes you completely fascinating for this talk. I'm jolly glad I programmed you. Tell the audience all about yourself.
My name is Ptolemy Mann, and I studied weaving at Central St Martin's in the early 90s, and then I went to the Royal College of Art. And I have been hand dyeing and hand weaving wall-based artworks ever since, so almost 30 years now. And my practice is really, I've worked a lot with interior designers, architects, galleries. I sort of straddle, I also work as a colour consultant, so I've done a lot of architectural work. So my practice is very broad. And recently I've started painting. So in the last sort of 4 years, I've started painting on paper and canvas. But of course, the paper is 100% cotton, canvas is cloth. So I'm really fascinated by this idea that for me, really, painting is a very textile practice. So it's really kind of merging. So I'm really sort of strangely having a kind of renaissance. My work has totally transformed in the last few years.
When you say the last few, sorry, I'm just going to butt in because I do that. When you say last few years, was this a response to the pandemic?
Well, I started just before, actually. Right. I mean, I thought about, so weaving is wonderful. I absolutely adore weaving, and I'm very much a crafts person. But it's incredibly slow, it's incredibly restrictive. I can only do straight lines. And I love that, and that's been very good for me in my practice. And I've always wanted to paint, and I've been thinking about painting. I was told when I was 18 that I was a really terrible painter, but I was a girl and I was good with colour, so I should do textiles.
Who told you that?
A tutor and a bloke, of course. And at the time I was mortified, and I just thought, well, I'll do textiles. And actually he did me a favour, and I ended up, and I'm really glad I did that, because I probably wasn't a great painter at that moment. But what's really interesting is those words stayed with me. So I've been thinking about painting for 25 years and haven't literally ever painted because of that. And then in 2018, I just started doing these small gestural abstract paintings. And I think I'm in an unusual position because of thinking about painting for 25 years, but not actually doing it. So when I finally came to put paint to canvas and paper, it was like these amazing things. And of course, they're quick, they're the complete opposite of the weaving. Right. So the weaving's very linear, very restricted, and then the paintings are these crazy gestural. And then you'll see a couple of pictures, actually. I've now actually started painting on top of the weaving, which is sort of, from most weavers' perspective, sort of anarchy. And people are saying, are you doing what I think you're doing? Are you painting on top of something that took you 3 months to weave? And I'm like, yes, I am. So it's really fun. I'm absolutely loving it.
Very good. Very good. Juliana, you're downstairs.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're showing downstairs. So.
Give yourself a plug, quick.
Cavalier Finn, just as you come in the entrance, we're a gallery. I'm one half of Cavalier Finn. I met my business partner, Deborah Finn, at university. We both did different careers. I was in the art world. I worked for 2 kind of leading white cube contemporary art galleries. And then when I had my first child, I kind of talked to Debs, and we thought, I kept having friends ask me they wanted to buy art, but they were intimidated by going into kind of white cube galleries. And they said, can you help me? So I thought, I've always loved the sort of Kettle's Yard and the Chelsea, the idea of bringing art into the home. So I started showing 19 years ago in my house in South London, not a grand house, but just always hanging wall works with objects. And I love the dialogue that creates. And we've built it up over 18 years now, and we do collect a lot of fairs. We work with weavers, we work with painters, we work with ceramicists, metalwork, textiles. We kind of choose our artists based on our aesthetic. Our portfolio is kind of very much, we would only show what we would want to buy, and also their technique, craftsmanship, and I suppose provenance and where they trained, and the whole kind of amalgamation of that is kind of how we choose our artists, really.
Was it a conscious decision to go into the more craft end? I mean, I know you still do the fine art side, but it seems to me that there aren't that many galleries. I mean, many of them, there's one or two that aren't, but many of them are downstairs. You're quite a small number. So was it a conscious decision to go into the craftier end of the market?
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, we very much wanted to have craft. You know, we wanted to make it. I just don't really like that differentiation between fine art and craft. I think everything is a sculpture, is beautiful, and most of our artists do things that are very sculptural, non-functional. So the idea is that everything works together. So yeah, it's very conscious that we would have objects on the table, works on the wall, and we like to see, and we always sort of, the dialogue is really important to us. As you can see downstairs, we think about how things work together, how sculptures interact with paintings, how metalwork interacts with weaving, and the colours in the weaving is pulled out in the ceramics. So we really do think hard about that.
You've opened up that kind of, I hesitate to call it Pandora's box, but certainly the debate about the perceptions of craft, about boundaries between disciplines, which I think this talk is in some ways about. I don't really want to get into the definitions of craft because the craft world has spent rather too long talking about that. But I think we can talk about whether the perception of craft has changed in the last 10 years or so from your different angles. I mean, Jo, obviously you had this foot in the crafts world, but say when I started writing about design, which is 25 years ago, the word craft was not mentioned. It just was not talked about. And actually there are still, and I won't particularly name names, but there are still generally male journalists from that era who still come out in hives if the craft word is mentioned. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, whether you feel the perception of craft has changed.
I did a course that was called craft design, and that was late 80s, early 90s, and so and actually really thrived in that environment because I was the only person on my course that was doing embroidery for fashion. Everybody was doing something different, or lots of different workrooms that you could go and tap into. It was a very multimedia course, so I have only very fond feelings for the word craft. So I'm kind of, I don't know, that certainly sort of maybe changes how I feel about it. But I've always been a big fan of like Crafts Magazine, the Crafts Council, and throughout kind of working as an interior designer, which is now 15 years, tried to find kind of craftspeople by using things like the Crafts Council list and that kind of thing, which actually is quite difficult to do. It was quite difficult to do, and kind of maybe easier these days to kind of find interesting craft through things like Instagram. You're talking about small makers who perhaps don't have time to do all of the marketing and the business and all those things. So actually, Instagram being instant means that actually, you know, they can sort of advertise themselves more easily and have an easier interface with someone like me. I think that's kind of helped the world maybe understand craft a little bit more. I think things like the Wave Prize really helps to elevate the idea of craft.
Yes.
Certainly from kind of being something that you might think of as people sitting in village halls doing, to actually being something worthy of, you know, a grand home, which is where it always was, really. You know, the sort of craftspeople that supplied the grand homes that, I don't know, we sort of lost that.
Well, yeah, I think this is true. I mean, I've been reading Nigel Coates's The Architect's Memoir, which has just been published by the RABA. And he's talking about designing these revolutionary interiors that he did in Japan in the 80s when he was lashing the wings of a plane to Cafe Bongo and stuff like that. And what's really striking about it is that he was working at that time. He commissioned Tom Dixon to do extraordinary bits of welding and metalwork and clocks and all sorts of Simon Moore, the glass guy. He had Mark Quinn, the artist, in these schemes. But somewhere, and I'm kind of glancing at you, Ptolemy, somewhere by the time I started writing about design in the mid-90s, that had kind of got lost, I feel.
I mean, I'm wondering from your perspective whether you feel that the perception of craft has changed and the kind of work that you get has developed over your career.
I mean, in some ways things have changed enormously, and in other ways they haven't. I don't know, it's interesting. I think for me, it's there's something about professionalism. So I've made a point recently of sort of saying I'm a professional weaver, you know, and people kind of laugh at that because they think that's amusing, that because we still have this notion that craft is somehow amateur. I don't know why, but we kind of do. So when someone presents themselves as a sort of professional, and for me also, it's not so much about craft, but it's about craftsmanship. So you could be a painter, you could be an architect and have very good craftsmanship. And for me, it's really about the quality of the work. It doesn't really matter whether you're an artist or a craftsperson or a designer or an architect. For me, it's about really good craftsmanship. And I think what's happening now is we're sort of reevaluating the value of good craftsmanship, whether it's in any of those fields. So for me, it's lovely because everything's overlapping and merging a lot more than it was maybe 25 years ago when I first started. But I also think there's something about fine art. So it sort of adds another layer. So the boundaries between fine art and craft are merging. And for me, that's sort of more interesting and more exciting than design versus craft.
Yeah.
But in a way, they're all merging. So it's kind of this whole thing of defining it. For me, it's about really good work. That is the thing that's really important, whatever you do. You know, and it can be really obscure and really niche, but to just do it as beautifully and intelligently as you possibly can, and to not worry so much about what category it falls into. And then that also affects value. I think the way we value craft is changing.
In what way?
Well, I felt like with the Craft Council and with craft, like you reach a ceiling. So, and to be really blunt, it's about price. So when you make work, especially if it's non-functional, if you make work that becomes quite expensive because of the amount of time it takes you to do it, there's like this sort of price point, like, I don't know, and you probably have more to say about this than I do, like, I don't know, once it goes over sort of $5,000 or something, you sort of tip into this really quite serious, it's a different value level. And in the craft world, you sort of hit a bit of a ceiling. So I remember being told, 15 years ago that my work was kind of too expensive. And I was like, well, it took me 3 months or 4 months to make this thing. Like how much, I mean, I can't possibly, even if I pay myself 2p an hour, it's got to be. So there's this whole thing about value. So for me, I think that's really interesting. How design fits into that, I'm not too sure. But so in a way, that has changed massively, I think. We're now finally, thank God, especially textiles, don't get me started about the value of textiles. We're finally starting to sort of value it. But that's really because the fine art world has picked up textiles and ceramics. And of course, no one thinks twice about paying £50,000 for an artwork, but to pay £50,000 for a pot, that's why people like Edmund de Waal are game changers, because suddenly people are like, So it's sort of about money, it's about value. So in a way, I'm actually going to completely contradict what I started. It's changed a lot. It's actually changed a lot, the more I think about it.
Oh, good, I'm glad, because if it hadn't, I think the whole nature of this debate would have been a complete waste of time, and we should all just go home.
Some things haven't changed. But yeah, actually, certain things have changed a lot.
I mean, Edmund did change the game, but partly Edmund changed the game because he wrote a book that was wildly successful.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting what adds value and what elevates you and your work.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the work, but it's certainly being able to communicate either directly about your work or around your work, which I think is fascinating. Since we're talking about value, Juliana, I'm going to turn to you. How do you go about... I've got two things, actually. Because you've talked about we kind of represent stuff we like, which is great. But have you ever unpicked what it is you like and why?
Good question. I think you're right about value. I mean, I think you approach an artist, and so we have an artist downstairs called Annie Turner. She's quite well known in the ceramic world, and it takes us 6 months to make her nets, which are coiled and hugely a difficult process that can collapse in the kiln. And her prices, it's just getting the right price is really tricky, because like you say, you could not flinch at a £20,000 painting, but suddenly when you get to that £10,000 for ceramic, it is questioned. So it's starting to actually change quite dramatically, and people are paying the high prices. Auctions are having that effect. You know, Grayson, I mean, whatever you say, he's done amazing things for, you know, putting craft on the map, pots, fine art. But I suppose where you've trained is quite important to us as a gallery. You know, provenance, like you say, if you're in a museum, then that gives you value. The V&A, you know, that's our job as a gallery, is to get their pieces, the artist pieces, into great collections. And great collections add value to work. You know, everyone wants to be in a great collection, and I think very carefully about placing our artworks in with good collectors, you know, because I think that's incredibly important. And throughout the whole world, really, we're selling to America. You want to be in a good museum in America, V&A, Fitzwilliam. We place a lot of our artists in those places, and that will suddenly increase their value. So I think, you know, we have to look out for our artists in terms of where we're placing their work too. I think that's our job, really.
Yeah. When you started the gallery, who did you start it with?
Friends.
Right, such as?
I had just people I knew. You know, they came along. I had private views in my house. They were really busy. And then slowly the demographic changes, and, you know, people start to talk about you. We got some reviews. I remember we got our first Daily Telegraph review. That's amazing. It's like people used to come in clutching it. And it's quite incredible. Press is quite important, you know, and word of mouth. I think it's quite interesting starting a business and watching it grow. You sort of grow, two women having kids, growing our business around that. And, you know, we have difficult times. It's kind of like this. I'd like sometimes it to be like that, but our life is like that, you know. Yeah. So, ups and downs. Yeah.
Interesting. So just as an aside, first time I met Edmund Duval, I'd just taken over Crafts, and we met for a cup of coffee, and we had, you know, a nice chat. And I said to him, "Oh, what are you up to next?" And he said, "Well, I'm heading off to the Lake Districts because I'm writing this book. My family had these, you know, little Japanese carvings called netsuke, and they've had quite an interesting history." And he talked about where they'd been across Europe and all that kind of stuff. Very good. Came back to the office, and they said, "What have you been up to?" And I said, "Well, I've just met Edmund Duval, and he's writing this book. I mean, it sounds quite interesting, but I can't imagine anybody's going to buy it." And the next time I bumped into him, which was outside 10 Downing Street, but he was having to leave early to sell the film rights to Netflix or somebody. Can we talk about relationships and how important they are, and how you build a relationship? You know, from your perspective as a designer, what do you look for in a craftsperson? I mean, their work is one thing, presumably, but you're also looking for kind of personal qualities, I'm guessing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, we interact with various different levels of craftsmanship. So there are people who make objects that we would style projects with, but also, you know, we have a specialist painter that we collaborate with on most of our projects. The curtain makers, the people who are literally installing the finishes that we want to use. So I always really enjoy that process, kind of overseeing, making sure that and over the course of the years, you know, how they're going to interact with each other. You know, sometimes you get like 6 people in one room trying to juggle around each other. So it does matter that they get on board, get the program, get the brief, and get on with what they need to do. But I think certainly in terms of interacting with crafts galleries, when we come to finish a project. So we just did a project for someone who's a pied-à-terre in Europe. They live in LA, and we had the opportunity to style that quite well, because not that they'd bought everything in advance, but we could just kind of say, this is what we would do. You know, borrow objects from, you know, this is when you've got relationships with good galleries. And so then in effect, they're trying it on at home to see how they feel about it. And quite often, we sell quite a lot that way. It works quite well. So those relationships are really important. And yeah, that was, yeah.
But I think it's trust as well. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, because I find that
Yeah.
works really well as a maker or as an artist, that you have to, I have a rug business sort of separately, and we always just lend the rugs, and people are like, oh, but don't you want a deposit? No, it's fine. You take the rug, you live with it for a few days. If it works out, great, we'll send you an invoice. And people think that's insane. And it's the same with an artwork. You know, you give someone a piece of a woven artwork that might be worth, you know, £10,000, and you say, look, well, if you pay the shipping to and from, you know, you can live with it for a while. I think trust is a really important part of that process, and you have to see it in context. I mean, I do quite a lot of photoshopping, so you Photoshop work into a space. If it's someone in America, they're not going to ship it over just to try it out. So then Photoshop can be really useful. But I think trust is a really big part of it from a maker's perspective, you know, and you want to work with an interior designer or a gallery that you trust, so that if you, and touch wood, I mean, I've never had anything bad happen. I find 99.9% of the time that trust results in a sale, usually.
Yeah.
But you're working on projects of very different scales as well, aren't you? I mean, you're talking about trust with, I guess,
I'm
a
talking about
private
trust,
individual.
whether it's someone buying a piece this big, you know,
Yeah.
or whether it's someone buying a really, you know, it doesn't really matter. It's still the same level of trust, whether it's a rug or whether it's a piece of textiles. I think it's, you know, and you build up relationships over time, and you find people that you know, art consultants or galleries, you know, and it's an important part of the process.
And what about architects like, I don't know, you work with Stanton Williams and Elias and Morrison. These are big practices doing big projects.
That's more as a colour consultant.
Right.
So that's not so much selling an object, that's selling a skill. So that's a little bit different. And I've done a lot of work with the NHS and putting colour in hospitals and all of that. So that's a slightly different kind of
But let's talk
angle.
about, I'm intrigued to talk to you about colour, because it's quite fashion. I mean, we're in a colourful moment, right?
We sure are. It's
And
great. Thank God.
Yeah.
It took a while, but we
Well,
got there in the end.
I was going to ask you about this, because you've been working with colour. I mean, we've known each other quite a long time. You've been working with colour since I've known you.
Yeah.
I mean, colour has gone, I mean, it sounds bizarre, but it goes in and out.
It does go
of
in
fashion.
and out, yeah.
And I'm often wondered whether you suddenly go, can I keep playing this furrow at the moments when it's not in fashion?
It's really hard. I mean, I remember having a meeting in New York in probably 2000, and I was like probably 25. And I was told by a gallery there, he said, oh, colour's easy. Colour's just decorative. He said, he said, oh yeah, you can leave a couple of pieces with me and I can probably flog them quite easily. I mean, he's like, colour is like, it's not really a big deal. Serious artists don't really use colour. And I remember just being like, oh my God, you know. And then I met Jaclyn Larsen, who's like this god of like textiles, and he said, I've been trying to think about why I hate your work so much. I was just like, oh my God. And he just said, you know.
How old were you at this point?
I was like, honestly, thank God, I was like, I'm just going to carry on anyway. But it's like there was a real moment in the 90s, you know, where it was like all about natural materials. It was like monofilament and wire, and it had to glow in the dark, and it had to be innovative. And everyone said, you're not innovative at all. Your work's really boring. You hand weave. It's cotton. It's on a loom. It's plain weave. It's like it couldn't be more boring. And it was really hard, you know, to hold your ground. And I just thought, you know, this is crazy. And people were like, Bauhaus? Like, Bauhaus was so uncool. And thank God I just hung in there long enough, you know. And there were some really lean years, I have to say. So now it's quite nice. So now suddenly people really are, and we need colour right now. It's all been a bit grim recently. And I think people just, you know, and I'm sure in interior design, I'm sure you have something to say about that. And I'm sure hopefully you found that, you know, colour sells.
Colour man.
Let's be really blunt. Colour sells.
Yeah, this is where I was trying to head to this. So, I mean, I guess, well, it's colour, question one, but also fashion, question two, and how those affect, well, craft, but who you represent and how you represent them.
Yeah, I don't really like that following fashion thing.
No, I
mean,
don't
I
either.
never choose people on, because I think you could tire of things like that. I think you have to, it's not just about choosing colour for the sake of it. It's like, you've got to live with this piece, you know, it's your piece. And I think with collecting, you choose something that you have an emotional connection with. That could be colour, it could be monotone. I mean, I love minimalist. I love Robert Ryman. I love Cy Twombly, but I also love colour. So I don't really have a sort of specific, you know, choice. I just kind of have an instinctive emotional reaction to it. And I kind of feel that that's how you sell work as well, because you've got to translate your emotion to people too. And I feel that, like I was saying, some people would be good at selling, but I find I can only really sell something I feel emotionally connected to. But colour is big. We've done colour downstairs. We've coloured the walls. We've got some bright sculptures, and it's kind of uplifting and spring-like. And a lot of our artists are very seasonal, and so they paint according to the weather outside. So, like the weavers are using hand-dyed wools that are kind of quite influenced by the countryside around them. So they're very much spring or summer, and that comes into their work. So I think we are all affected by seasons, aren't we? I mean, I feel as soon as sunshine comes out, we all feel a little bit uplifted.
Yeah, no, I'm all for that. I mean, Joe, we've had last couple of years careers such as Yinka Ilori's has kind of exploded. Adam Nathaniel Furman has been very vocal about the importance of colour. Camilla Walala is another who's been getting acres of press. Is that feeding into what you're discovering in your practice?
I've always loved colour though as well. I always just do love colour much more than I've never really been minimalist ever. But I think when you're dealing with someone's home, it's also quite good to be able to sort of understand the light that comes in at the different times of year. We worked on a project where there was a church opposite that was really quite an orange stone, and the effect of the light bouncing off this church into all of the rooms. You really had to kind of test the colours in situ. So we'd paint sort of boards and hold them up and hold them around the room and hope not just to kind of go, this feels really sympathetic, but that it plays somehow with it, that it's sort of, it's a craftsmanship thing as well. But yeah, no, I've always loved colour very much. And even like there'll be a moment where you kind of designed a project. It was a lot of quite busy wallpaper, but it was all quite similar tones. And it was like, you just need a breath from that, and it's throwing quite an odd colour into the mix that kind of just makes everything just, you can take a breath in that space, because it just gives you a moment of sort of reflection on the colour that you've seen a lot of. I don't know. It works for me when I walk through the house and go, yes, that did what I hoped it would do. But yes, no, we've actually got probably quite a colourful project coming up. The cover of House and Garden. Which is actually a client that we've worked with previously,
right.
And then they've relocated. So
what have you done for them, Joe? Let's plug it while we're here.
So we did their home in King's Cross area, which was quite a dark space, and we sort of did pump it full of colour because there wasn't very much sort of daylight coming through. So put some really vibrant teal joinery in there, and then when they moved to a slightly larger house with a bit more light coming in, we just sort of lightened the colours but kept all the same furniture. So that's the pieces about that pretty much. But sort of there's a gold ceiling, which is
a gold ceiling,
gold paint.
Crikey.
It's on the reel, and the walls are sort of a soft blue, but the sofa's red, and it just, it makes me very happy. I love it.
And it's out now.
Yeah,
you can buy it now, people. You can buy it now.
Exactly. But always colour.
Yeah. So Ptolemy, with this kind of renaissance of colour, but with renewed interest in colour and certain people's careers kind of exploding across the media and in design festivals and the like, do you sit there kind of going, I've been doing this for 20 years? I mean, is it a moment of joy that people have?
It's interesting. It's like you can't take ownership of, I'm known for using really strong colour, but I don't own that. It's my signature, but I'm not the only person doing it. So I'm just thrilled. It's good for everyone and it makes us feel better. And it's the same with ECAT. When I started ECAT weaving, it was so obscure, nobody even knew what it was. And now you can buy an ECAT mug in Tesco's. ECAT became so mainstream, I can't even believe it. And I found that, initially I found that a bit odd. I was sort of like, my sort of thing that I love and feel really precious about, it suddenly just sort of exploded into the mainstream over a sort of 20-year period, almost now to the point where I think people are slightly sort of sick of ECAT in a way. But that was harder, I think, than the colour thing. But again, you can't own it's a 2,000-year-old technique. It's not, even though I'm known for doing it, I'm not the only person who does it. And sometimes I get phone calls from people who say, I've seen a rug and it looks just like one of yours, and they're copying you. And I'm like, no, believe me, they're not copying me. It's been around for thousands of years.
Why did you decide to take up that technique in the first place?
I guess because I wanted to be a painter, and I was told I was a crap painter. And weaving is so restrictive. So the dip dyeing of the warp threads was a really quick, wonderful, gestural way of getting the colour on the thread. And the technique of weaving that I learned, it's not like tapestry, which we're looking at right here. You can only do straight lines, and it's much more sort of, and usually it would be to make a functional object. So you'd make a scarf or a cushion, and I knew I wanted to make art. I'm basically a frustrated painter. So the ECAT dyeing, it was also practical. So it meant you can put a 10-meter warp on, and you can change the color through a million different colors. Put it on the loom once, because it takes 2 weeks to set the loom up. So it was actually a really practical solution. It's slightly cheating. I always feel like it's slightly cheating, because otherwise you put a warp on and the colour's the same all the way along. Whereas if you dip dye that warp, you can get many, many things out of one setup. So it was the result of a sort of kind of, sort of slightly cheating, slightly clever, but also I loved it. I just loved that blurred effect, and I actually loved that you were tapping into this ancient sort of venerable kind of technique. I kind of loved that history, the provenance. We've mentioned provenance a few times. I think ECAT is an extraordinary thing, and it's also there's Japanese ECAT, Indian ECAT, there's Indonesian, Uzbekistan. It's actually one of those mad things that comes from all over the world, which is quite unusual.
It is really beautiful. I love ECAT. I really love ECAT, and I slightly avoid anything that's kind of looks like it's ECAT but isn't.
Yeah.
And I feel that strongly about a lot of materials and a lot of sort of craft techniques. Like, is it honest?
Well, there are a lot of
Does it have
prints now
integrity?
that look like ECATs,
exactly.
but they're printed.
Yeah.
So that's
no.
a whole other thing.
I've asked quite a number of questions. I'm looking at Becky to check if she's got the microphone. And what I thought I might do is throw this open, because what I've learned is throughout the other talks, I've not given people enough time to ask questions. So I'm very keen to give you plenty of space. So you've kind of got used to that. I'm hoping you got the hang of that thing. Anybody got any questions you'd like to ask the panel? Oh, don't be shy. Yes. If you could wait for the microphone and let us know who you are and maybe what you do, that would be great.
I'm Simone Dubois, and I'm with the Design Centre.
Hello,
so I am. I wanted to kind of throw this one. It's probably a little bit of all of you, but maybe sort of Joe and Jules, about commissioning craft makers and whether as an interior designer you feel sort of with a relationship with a gallery that's a really comfortable and trusting way that you can talk to them about commissioning pieces, or how that relationship kind of works.
Who wants to take that?
I mean, we have commissioned things, but actually somehow we tended to buy things that are already made more when we're talking about objects. So there's a sort of, it has its life already. We can kind of see where this would go. We have commissioned lots of finishes and lots of rugs as well over the years, and that's to do with the subtlety of colour or a texture that we particularly want but want to try in a different format. Or I mean, we do commission a lot of. I just did, which is I love this. This always falls into my remit as well. We had a turret in a Victorian Gothic revival house, and we wanted to have a hanging seat, and to get something that was the right weight, with the right sort of detailing in. So that I worked on that, and then worked with I'd love to have given it to a factory in England, but I couldn't. But price point didn't allow for that. So it's a bit of a folly, to be honest, because it's a moment of joy, but it's not an honest craft piece. It's fulfilled its brief. I'd like to do that more. It's kind of getting people to buy into that as an idea.
Yeah, I suppose that's where the gallery comes in. We can do all the technical stuff without involving the artists. But we have some artists that are kind of open to that. They could pretty much do something to brief, but commissions can be tricky sometimes because people often don't get what they want, and it can be problematic. But I suppose having a gallery, it takes away that kind of any kind of issues like that. If it's not quite right, I think you can be an intermediary kind of contact and sort of iron it out.
I mean, I've done masses of commissions. I mean, all through when I first started, that was all I did. Everything I did was to commission everything. And it worked with a lot of architects. And there was this sort of thing in the late 90s and the early noughties where it was like a percentage for art type thing. And a lot of architects, I did a lot of work to commit, a lot of atriums, a lot of lobbies. And I think it's about trust again. And I think for me as an artist, it was about how I communicated my ideas. So I had to get really good at Photoshop really early on because you had to, I mean, in the beginning I did hand-painted gouache sketches to scale. So I had to know how to use a scale ruler, had to know how to visualize, had to know how to look at an architectural plan so that, okay, here's the wall and it's 3 stories high and here are my little pieces of weaving. And then you have to deliver what you say you're going to deliver. And a lot of that was trust. I mean, touch wood, I have in 30 years, I've never had someone reject a commissioned piece, and I've done hundreds of commissions. So I think it's a really, and I know a lot of artists don't like doing work to commission. The older I get, I'm slightly less open to it. But for me, it's been a really, it's you know you're going to be paid before you start the piece. I mean, that's phenomenal. You know, it's very hard to make, especially large scale work, off your own back when you don't know whether you're going to sell it or not. It's really nerve-wracking, whereas when you do work to commission, you kind of know it's sold before you've done it. There's always a little bit of a risk, but I think that's quite exciting as well.
I have a clock ticking on this monitor, and it's telling me we have 3 minutes and 44 seconds left. So does anybody have a question? Yes, hello, right in the front. It's getting Becky running around. Look at her, here she comes.
Hi, my name's Alex. I'm a sculptor. But I just have a quick question for Joe because I love Joe's work, and I really like what you do with ceilings. So I just want you to quickly talk about your ceilings.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, we've got 3 minutes and 15 seconds to talk about your ceilings.
We do. I mean, it seems to be like something that lots of people are talking about in the interior design press at the moment. But we've done commissioned murals on ceilings, which actually worked out really well. But there's the gold ceiling that we just did as well. It sort of there's a way in which one particular project that we did, the way we painted the ceiling soft pink. And the walls were soft grey, and we designed all the cornice. So all of the vertical faces were painted the same colour as the wall, or the horizontal were painted the same colour as the ceiling. So when you glance into the room, it just feels like sunset is washing into the room. Or in another room, we painted the ceiling very, very pale yellow, and the walls are white. So it feels like the sunrise is washing in. So it's like a fun game that I think has been missed out.
Do you bring that to them, or do they?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
You suggest it.
Oh yeah, yeah. But and that's got sort of architectural history, detailing up all of the cornice. It was a house in Holland Park that had no architectural detailing. We could just install whatever we wanted. So it was a really lovely project from that point of view. We could have a massive impact on it architecturally, as well as all the furniture and finishings and stuff. It was good. That was a nice project.
Very good, very good. We've maybe got time for one really quick question. If anybody, you're right at the back.
Hi, probably it's not a quick question to answer, but it's some question I want to ask. The topic today is about handmade interior, right? So I'm not too sure now, like a craftsman, like all the craft are equal to handmade. So they're not necessarily all 100% handmade. So I just want to know, the definition of the handmade for today for all the craftsmanship we're doing. Because I'm personally a shoe designer.
Right.
So I remember when I went to Italy, the factory, and I asked a guy, like what designer they've been working with, right? And I'm not going to mention the designer anyway. I was saying, I know that designer is really famous, and all his shoes are handmade. He said, well, not really. It's like only maybe 50%. But I said, then why say handmade under the shoes? And they said, it's a handling. So I just want to know, like in all the interior design world or like craftsmanship world right now, like does people in the market care about the result or they care about the handmade purely? So which one is more important to the customer?
Okay, I'm going to maybe turn to Joe really quickly. Ignore the clock. Ignore the clock, it's fine.
I think craftsmanship is like the key word there, because I think anyone can, like, even using Photoshop and having a level of attainment in that, I think is the craft in some way, you know.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, if you are a master of your tools, no matter what your tools are, if that's a computer or it's a, you know, or a, you know, a loom or whatever it is, I think that is craft.
I think that's a really good moment to wind this up, and maybe we can come back to that afterwards if you like, because I'm very aware this is being filmed and I have a time limit, so I have to wind this up. I would just like to say thank you so much to the panel, to Juliana, to Ptolemy, to Joe. Thank you all very much, and thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it.
And thanks from us too, Ptolemy and Joe and Juliana, for such a joyful session. Gosh, we covered a lot, didn't we? Colour, honesty, emotional connection. Juliana, when you were talking about setting up your business, you talked about the artwork on the walls and the objects on the table and how you loved the dialogue it created. You know, craft has never been more important for interiors, and here at the Design Centre we couldn't be more thrilled. So thank you for such a marvellous session, and Grant for leading it so beautifully. Do have a look at the galleries if you haven't already, and let's give our wonderful panel another big thank you.